So how many are homeless in Canada? And the estimates, I think if you read various reports, the estimates do vary depending on methodology, whether it's survey, whether there's an actual study that people go out and what have you. But there's an estimated 235,000 plus, and I would presume rising. That figure rises throughout all of Canada. On average, there are about 5,000 who are sleeping outdoors. There are about 180,000 using emergency shelters, and about 50,000 overall are temporarily accommodated. And Gary mentioned hotels, jail cells, even hospitals overnight are emergency beds. Temporarily accommodated can also mean that people are in other people's homes, couch surfing, so to speak. And who are homeless? Again, there was this morning I was noting that certainly more women these days are coming through your doors. I would anticipate though that the most common individual who comes through would be the single male, fairly young, 25 to 55 thereabouts, who would make up the biggest percentage of your guests coming through. But there are also special groups that are represented, and I would presume also rising. And how many of youth would you see in Barrie, for instance? Would that be 5, 10%, a small figure maybe, a small figure. And of that group, the youth, there's also a subsection of the LGBT subgroup who are coming through. And again, for various reasons, who are out of their homes and needing accommodation and shelter. Women again are represented in the group, and the Aboriginal Native community are also represented in the group. The median length of stay actually for, again, across the country would be about a month or so who would use shelters. But then you also have chronic users who come back repeatedly, who can't get out of homelessness and who need your services. There's a figure of about 4,000 to 8,000 who are chronically homeless across Canada. And as we bring it down, narrow it down to the homeless in Barrie, we have figures that are also fairly startling. The Homeless Hub, on that website, is where the information comes from. In 2011, there were over 7,000 people seeking help. Of those, there were over 1,400 utilizing facilities, including emergency beds, such as the Salvation Army, Youth Haven, for instance, Elizabeth Fry Society. And for me, women are always a special category, for obvious reasons. But I think they're also amongst the most vulnerable in our society as well too. And in Simcoe County, the Alliance to End Homeless has these figures, that in 2009, more than 400 women spent a night in a shelter. They don't say, though, I have to add, how many of them may come as dependents. There are over 2,500 plus women who are out of a home and are using other facilities like friends' homes or some other temporary shelter. And in 2008, 21% of those women were also sexually assaulted. More than half of the women living on the street have been diagnosed with a mental health issue, the majority of those issues being of a depressive type nature. And so there are several challenges. There's the substance use challenge, whether it's alcohol, whether it's other type of an illegal drug. The mental health issue. There's the social isolation, the low self-esteem, medical issues, as well as physical pain. Although I'm going to focus on the substance use and the mental health issues, I don't think we can underestimate the medical issue and the constant kind of physical pain that people are experiencing and suffer on a daily basis that just add to their behavioral difficulties, their emotional difficulties. I also want to mention that for many, even though they may accommodate or they may have a place in your shelter, how many of them actually sleeping restfully? We go to bed, and for most of us, we get hopefully 7 to 8 hours of sleep if we're lucky, and that's hopefully a restful sleep. How many of your guests have a restful sleep for that length of time? And so we have, in addition to the challenges, we have sort of the needs, and what are their needs? Obviously, it's to have shelter, the basic physical needs, have shelter, have accommodation, have food to eat, have a connection, which is also terribly important. We are social beings. We need other people to bounce ideas off, to find support from, to be validated. We also need a purpose in life. What are you doing here today? Your purpose in life includes volunteering. And with that purpose, hopefully comes a sense of competence. We are good at what we do. A sense of security. And also very important, that sense that we control our destiny to a large extent. We are autonomous. We can choose to do X, we can choose to do Y. And certainly with the homeless, their opportunities to be autonomous are much lower. So back in 2007, there was a survey done in Toronto of about 368 adults who are using shelters and the meal programs. And this figure that they came up with shows that 14% of them only had a mental health issue. 43% of them had only a substance use issue. 26% had both a mental health issue as well as a substance use issue. And 17% of them reported neither. These figures may be conservative. When we go to the doctor, how many of us actually tell the entire truth about everything that's happening to us? And I don't think anybody else is different. So again, the formal diagnosis means that you've had to be seen by a physician or a doctor or someone to have a formal diagnosis. I would think that these numbers are, again, lower than expected. They are higher, however, than the general population figures. So across the board, regardless of whether you are just using a substance or whether you're having a mental health issue, these figures are higher than the general population that you would find. Within the population of the homeless, however, there are discrepancies between those with what's called a concurrent, meaning that you have both a substance use as well as a mental health disorder, so it's coexisting at the same time, it's concurrent. There's a difference between that population, that segment of the population within the homeless, versus other individuals who are homeless but don't have both things happening. So titrating it down to overall, when you look at those numbers, those individuals with concurrent disorders have a generally much worse time across the board. Generally, they report their health to be poorer or not as good. Generally, they have more suicidal thoughts, more suicidal attempts. They're more likely to be physically assaulted, higher levels of stress, and a sense of being alone or isolated. So with people walking through your doors, they're not all the same, obviously. There's great, even though we have a rubric that says they're homeless, there's great heterogeneity or complexity of individuals who walk through all of the outer the cold doors. Not everyone is the same, not everyone comes in with the same background, reason for being there, reason for wanting to be out of there. But I would ask you to pay attention to this segment of the population, who require, I think, as Gary was mentioning earlier, sort of your eyes and your ears to sort of observe, to listen to be attentive to. Because those individuals would likely require and exhibit potentially greater difficulties.